If you've ever had surgery, you have experienced one of the greatest and maybe most underappreciated achievements in all of modern medicine, general anesthesia. It's the science that literally conquered pain, and its invention didn't just change healthcare, it changed everything.
But before we get into the how, we really need to understand the why. Just take a look at this. This is what surgery used to be. It was brutal, it was terrifying, and the patient was awake for every single second of it. The only mercy, the only kindness, was a surgeon who was fast.
That reality, that period in history, has a name. It's called the Age of Agony, and for good reason. It was a time when people feared the surgeon's knife almost as much as the disease it was trying to fix.
I mean, really think about that for a second. Up until the mid-1800s, there was absolutely no way to block surgical pain. None. Which meant that operations were only for the most extreme life-or-death situations. It was literally a race against the clock, and a race against the absolute limits of what a human being could endure.
But that long, dark age of agony? Well, it was about to end. A series of incredible discoveries was about to turn the tide against pain, kicking off a breakthrough that would redefine what medicine could even do.
And you can see on this timeline just how fast things started moving. It really kicks off in 1846 with William Morton and his big demonstration of ether. Then just 1 year later, chloroform shows up in Britain. But look at that last date, 1942. That is the real game changer. The introduction of Cure, a muscle relaxant, gave doctors this whole new level of control, and, it truly started the modern age of anesthesia as we know it.
In this painting, it just perfectly captures that incredible moment at Massachusetts General Hospital. For the first time, in front of an audience of doctors, a patient is undergoing surgery, and he isn't screaming. He's not thrashing or fighting. He's just still. In that room, on that day, pain was finally conquered.
But here's the thing. It turns out that just knocking a patient out isn't nearly enough. As surgery got more complex, it became super clear that true, safe anesthesia was actually a three-part challenge.
So let's get a clear definition. What is general anesthesia? Officially, it's a drug-induced, reversible state that gets rid of both sensation and consciousness. And that word, reversible, that is absolutely the key. It's a temporary, totally controlled state you can bring someone into and then bring them back out of.
And this right here, this gets to the very heart of the modern practice. An anesthesiologist isn't just doing one thing. They are performing this constant, delicate balancing act between three totally different goals: to keep a patient perfectly safe and still.
So, what are these three pillars? Okay, number one, unconsciousness. Pretty straightforward. The patient has to be asleep. Number two, analgesia. That means the complete absence of pain. And number three, and this one is so important, muscle relaxation. I mean, you can't have a patient's muscles twitching or tensing up while a surgeon is doing something incredibly delicate. All three of these have to be managed perfectly, all at the same time.
Now, those early anesthetics, like ether, they tried to do all three jobs with just one drug, kind of like using a sledgehammer to do brain surgery. Modern medicine, thankfully, has come up with a much, much more precise and elegant solution.
And this slide just lays out that evolution perfectly. Over on the left, you have monoanesthesia, one drug, one big hammer, which meant you often had to use dangerously high doses to get the job done. But on the right, you have modern balanced anesthesia. Here, you're using a cocktail of different specialized drugs. It's way more precise and, as you can imagine, dramatically safer.
And you can see that modern strategy right here. There's a specific drug to handle unconsciousness, another one that's a specialist in blocking pain, and a third one that's an expert at muscle relaxation. Each one does its one job perfectly, which gives the anesthesiologist a level of control that was just a fantasy back in the day.
Okay, so we know what these drugs do. We know the goals, but how do they actually do it? How do they silence the brain and the body? Let's dive into a little neuroscience. So this is the big question, right? What is actually happening down at the cellular level? How do these chemicals manage to turn down the volume on our neurons and create the state of unconsciousness? Well, for a lot of anesthetics, the secret is a neurotransmitter called GABA. The easiest way to think about GABA is that it's the main brake pedal for your brain. It tells your neurons to calm down.
Now here's the really clever part. The anesthetic drugs don't slam on the brakes themselves. Instead, they make your brain's own GABA brake pedal way more sensitive, way more effective. This creates this state of hyperinhibition that makes it much, much harder for any neurons to fire. The whole system just gets temporarily and safely quieted down. Anesthesiologists also have to be masters of timing. How quickly does a patient go to sleep? Well, that's all about something called the blood/gas coefficient. Think of it this way. A drug that doesn't really like to dissolve in the blood, one with a low coefficient like desflurane, just races straight to the brain. Boom, fast induction. But a drug that dissolves really easily in blood, one with a high coefficient, it kind of takes a more scenic route, which means a slower induction. And then you have the question of strength, or potency. We measure that with something called MAC. Now this one is a little counterintuitive, so stick with me. The lower the MAC value, the more potent the drug. So you can see halothane has a tiny MAC, which means it's super powerful. But look at nitrous oxide way over there. Its MAC is huge. It's a really weak anesthetic. So why would we ever use it? Because it's an amazing painkiller. And that is a perfect example of using the right tool for the right job in balanced anesthesia. All right, let's put all these pieces together. Let's see how all these concepts play out in a modern, carefully choreographed anesthetic plan. I know this looks a little complicated, but it's actually a beautiful map of the entire surgical journey. So, let's trace it. Way over on the left, you see pre-medication. That's stuff like diazepam to help you relax before you even get to the OR. Then comes induction, that blue line, where a drug puts you to sleep. Then you enter this long maintenance phase in the middle, where different drugs are layered in. Some for muscle relaxation, some for pain, others to keep you unconscious. And finally, on the right, you get to recovery, where reversal agents are given to wake you up. It's really like a performance in 4 acts. And here are those 4 acts laid out nice and simple. It all starts with pre-medication, just to ease anxiety. Then comes induction, to bring on unconsciousness. That's followed by maintenance, the long part, where that whole triad is carefully balanced. And finally, recovery, where the patient is brought safely back to the world. When you add it all up, what you have is a process that is so far beyond just being a blunt instrument. Modern anesthesia is this elegant, incredibly controlled, and totally reversible journey into and out of consciousness itself, managed second by a highly skilled expert. It's been more than 175 years since that first public surgery without pain. And in that time, the science has advanced in ways that William Morton and his colleagues could never, ever have imagined.